We're going to talk this afternoon about the significance and the importance and the opportunities that are presented to us with a new space. We tend to think about arts and cultural spaces as being downtown, as being in urban settings. So when we think about the theater, oftentimes we think about going downtown, but of course there are more and more theaters and performing arts centers and arts centers popping up in places other than Baltimore. We've got a beautiful hall in Strathmore and Bethesda. We've got the Olney Theater. Throughout Maryland, there are terrific places, and this is now added to that very distinguished list. Baltimore is so rich in cultural destinations, and sometimes we tend to forget that the universities are part of this great cultural fabric. So we're delighted that UMBC is once again stepping up and being yet again another major player in the cultural dimension of our community. As you've heard, the motto of the Arts and Humanities is think, create, and engage. So we're going to do that a little bit with a series of panelists who are seated to my left and my right. And I'd like to invite the first four to come on up. And this is going to be a bit like the Gong Show. It's my job to keep an eye on the clock and to make sure that we get out of here somewhere in the vicinity of 5 o'clock. But we are going to be asking each of our pairs of panelists to address this question, to ponder this notion of how does one think, create, and engage in a new space, and what does this new space do to help us do that. So we're going to start over here to my left with Wendy Salkin and Jessica Berman. Wendy is an actor. For 10 years, she was an associate artist with the Maryland Stage Company, and at UMBC, she teaches acting, movement, and Alexander technique, and she was the recipient of the Presidential Teaching Award. Please welcome Wendy Salkin. Jessica Berman is an associate professor of English and affiliate associate professor of gender and women's studies, affiliate associate professor of language, literacy, and culture, and the former chair of the English department. She's written 3 books. Her interests include Transnational Modernism, Literature and Culture, and Feminist and Literary Theory. Please welcome Jessica Berman. So again, my job is to sort of keep an eye on the clock and to go back and forth between our panelists. If we have time, we're going to have some questions at the end. So Wendy, let me start with you. We're going to be speaking with folks not only from the faculty here at UMBC, but also from the community at large. What does this building represent to you, not just in terms of UMBC and the theater department here, but in terms of the national conversation about the role of arts and humanities in education? And why don't you grab that microphone?
What strikes me the most about this is that the very first thing in elementary education that's abolished when they're worried about test scores and being competitive in math is the arts. And to be in a science tech campus where we are on top of a hill, that this building says that art is important and reinforces that. And having been here for 33 years and been an artist for a long time, it couldn't mean more to me.
That's great. And Jessica, you're in the English department. What does it mean to you to have the English department being placed in this great close proximity to your colleagues in the theater department?
Well, I think the building just as a whole represents the coming together of performing arts, humanities, social sciences, and the sciences at the core of a liberal arts experience. And the fact that we're all here in this gorgeous space on the top of the hill, it makes a really dramatic statement about the state and the university's support for those disciplines. And we love the fact that it's an interdisciplinary building. We talked about it much when we were designing it. And we're hoping that these wonderful spaces allow us to bump into our colleagues, to begin to create new synergies, new coursework, perhaps new research. We already do that, but maybe we'll be doing it more.
Yeah, can you think of ways in which the building itself, I mean, this great, beautiful new space, which just gives a lift to everybody's step, you know, the ways that it really is going to prompt new ideas and new relationships?
It's already prompting new relationships. I know that my colleague Michelle Oshero in English bumped into one of her colleagues in the theater department, and they are already engaged in a new course that they're working on together. But I think there's also lots of other ways in which the building is prompting new ways for us to think. In particular, we have wonderful new computer labs where we are asking, every first-year student is going to come through those computer labs and take composition. And in those labs, they'll be thinking not only about composition in a new way as a digital process, but also thinking about themselves as connected to the world by being online, creating multimedia projects and thinking about the way that those will take them forward. And we're hoping that, if the students are all in here for their first-year composition class, that they'll be coming back again and again. They'll see this building as really central to the campus and central to their experience.
And Wendy, you've got, Vincent Lancisi, who we'll speak to in a little bit, who's got a new theater as well. You're the envy of the theater world now with all these great bells and whistles. You've got every gadget and gizmo you can imagine in here. It's just a beautiful thing. And I wonder, in what ways are all these beautiful gadgets and gizmos and this technology, how are they going to help the creative process and the sort of down and dirty dimension of what you're doing here on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I think that when you have sophisticated technology, it can trigger a different way of thinking about how you conceptualize. And there's something really seductive about technology, that suddenly you say, oh, I can do this and I can do that, and ooh, this is going to look fantastic. And I think that for a designer or a director to suddenly be able to conceive of how to create place on stage changes when they have this level of technology. But it also, technology can intensify the experience of an audience. And I was thinking that my own research recently has been in the writings of Gertrude Stein, who is a modernist who wrote about language and wanted us to hear language differently, and I was very interested in the musicality of her language. And I developed a performance piece, worked collaboratively with Linda Dustman, one of my colleagues in music, who wrote a sound score. And I was thinking that if I were to perform that piece in this theater or in the new recital hall with surround sound, where the audience experiences voices coming from behind them, from the sides, that there's a sense, a visceral sense of sound kind of penetrating your body. And that's exactly what that piece is about, that language has a musicality that's very visceral. That would have been thrilling, that will be thrilling. But I think it's dangerous to think that we can only do exciting, creative things with technology, and that technology itself is not the creative act. So we need to allow it to inform us, and that for all of us, that it needs to be a way of triggering our imagination, but it's not an end in itself.
And Wendy, so much about the work that we do as artists and in the humanities is about asking questions. It's about asking good questions. What kind of questions do you think are going to be engendered by being in this new, beautiful set of surroundings?
Well, the first thing about this space is that it's so light and it's spacious. And so students already have said, some students have said, wow, I feel like there's something more important about what I'm doing. And one of the questions that's come up is, when I'm in a large space, I feel smaller. And we talked about that really what's changing is what's happening to your interior, your internal space. And I think that's kind of a question that we look at. What can this space do for us, but how does that impact us so that our relationship to the space is going to change?
Jessica, let me pose that same question to you. You are involved in something called Transnational Modernism. I'll confess I have no idea what that is.
I think a lot of people don't know what I'm talking about. Well, I mean, one of the things that is important in humanities inquiry is to ask good questions. And I know, we're not the only discipline that asks good questions. I think every discipline does. But one of the crucial things about humanities is the framing of the question is often as important as the answers that you get. And so if we ask the question, how do we think about space? And when our space changes, how does that change our understanding of ourselves in relation to communities around us? Then we can get at some really important ideas. And I think we can get at them very often, at least I like to believe, through cultural expressions in the arts and in literature and other texts. So, well, I mean, one example of that would be those digital writing labs that I just mentioned, that students would be physically in those spaces, right? But they are thinking about themselves as they encounter the world virtually, as they connect with others around the globe. My work in particular has been asking these kinds of questions about 20th century modernist fiction. And in particular, I've been arguing that we should set aside some of the stock ways we have of thinking about traditions, thinking about language groups, not just English literature, Spanish literature, even post-colonial literature, but that we should begin to think about the variety of ways that writers and artists are connected to each other around the globe. Once we begin to set aside these stock ways of thinking about power groups or nationalities, we begin to see a lot of the really profound and complex networks of connection and affiliation and community that exist across the world. So, for example, I've been able to discover some really unexpected connections between the really canonical writer James Joyce that we heard the governor talking about, and a very underappreciated writer, Mukraj Anand, in India. And these are writers that we would never otherwise put together. But by looking in a different direction at possible connections among their works, I've been able to discover various different ways in which they're very deeply connected. And so I think this kind of work, I hope, this kind of questioning in the humanities can help us to understand very different ways of thinking about our communities and our affiliations.
All right, Jessica Berman, Wendy Salkin, thank you both for sharing your perspective. Appreciate it. Our next guests are Dorian Bulger and George Sisal. This is it's not actually the Gong Show, it's more like the Newlywed Game, isn't it? So Dorian, yeah, does George prefer boxers or briefs? Yeah, these are the questions I think of when I come in this new theater, Dr. Braska. I'm sorry. It's just the kind of guy I am. Dorian Bulger is the director of the Baltimore Museum of Art. She's been there since 1998. The BMA will reopen their contemporary wing in November of 2012. The next phase of improving the presentation, the next phase will involve improving the presentation of the American and African art collections, the lobby, and the essential infrastructure. That'll be completed during the museum's 100th anniversary in 2014. She is one of the great lights and leaders of the Baltimore arts community. Please welcome Dorian Bulger. George Sisal founded the Contemporary Museum, and you served for how many years in that capacity? And served for 7 years as its director. He has mounted groundbreaking exhibitions, created community arts programs, and taught courses in the fine arts and humanities for over 40 years. He began when he was 6. In 1997, he was appointed curator in residence at MICA, where he now serves as the director of the new MFA in curatorial practice. Please welcome George Sisal. So Dorian, let me talk to you about space as it transcends and extends past the bricks and mortar of this beautiful place. You've been very involved in the Baker Artists Awards, much of which takes place digitally online. Tell folks what the Baker Artists Awards are about and how that is affecting the conversation about the arts these days. And let me suggest that you guys actually just hold these things and pass them back and forth. Great.
Thanks, Tom. For those of you who don't know about the Baker Artists Awards, we have a foundation in town, the William G. Baker Memorial Fund, which has become all arts all the time, and about 5 years ago initiated an online application process where artists could nominate themselves for very substantial awards, $25,000, 3 awards each year at that level. Amazing. I mean, you can imagine the reaction, the galvanized impact this had on the artists in our city. About 800 artists in all different disciplines, theater, music, visual arts, writing, film, apply online. And what this has created is a digital space where we can see the best artists in our community, where we can not only learn about them ourselves here in Baltimore, but the Google Analytics tell us it goes way beyond Baltimore, that there are colleagues in New York and San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Chicago who are trolling through these artists and really very impressed with what's happening. And it's interesting, in our experience at the BMA in working with the Baker Fund, when the website was announced, I said to my late colleague, Nancy Harrigan, who was involved, and Melissa Warlow, who's the program officer at Baker, you know, I think it's great that this is digital, but I'm old, and I wish it was also actual. So we put our heads together and cooked up the idea of pairing with that, actually showing the work of the artists at the BMA. So we've been privileged for about 5 years now to be a part of that. And I think it makes a very interesting juxtaposition, you know, the ways in which digital space serve us, the ways in which actual space serve us, the engagement of people eye to eye, face to face, the more we have the capacity to create these spaces that are virtual, almost more we feel the need emotionally to be together in these spaces to experience actual objects, actual artworks. So it's been great working on that.
And George, when you founded the Contemporary Museum, it was done on a very radical premise, and that was there was no particular space. There was no space.
Right, there was no space, and really we were the unmuseum. We really were, you have to put this in perspective, 23 years ago, when museums like the BMA and the Walters were very closed, members-only institutions, and not places that welcomed communities or reached out to communities. And so the Contemporary was founded really on the principle of questioning museum practice. And by going into different communities and different neighborhoods, working with artists in those neighborhoods, we were able to try to connect what artists were doing with people's everyday lives. And so we were nomadic, we roamed from place to place. We were in vacant buildings, but we were also at non-contemporary arts institutions like the Walters or the Maryland Historical Society, the Museum of Industry. We were back of a pickup truck that went into different neighborhoods in 5 states. So we really were taking art to where everyday people who were not engaged in the arts at that point and trying to see how artists might think of ways of connecting to them. We're very fortunate that that has changed now. That since Dorian's tenure at the BMA and since Gary Vicon's at the Walters, our museums have opened up their doors very wide and become, you know, community-based organizations now.
And Dorian, you and Gary, as George mentioned, been among the leaders in really upping the relevance and the resonance of the arts in the community. And I know the Baltimore Choral Arts Society, I try to do that. Kwame tries to do it at Center Stage. Marin's trying to do it at the Symphony. Everybody's trying to make what we do relevant. How do you approach that challenge of making the BMA and the arts, you know, really part and parcel of people's social DNA?
Well, I guess I would go back to the mantra that Freeman introduced today: think, create, engage. Part of it starts with the museum being free, and the Walters as well. We both now have free admission, so anyone can come anytime. But that's not enough. You know, it's not enough to throw the doors open and not charge people coming in. You have to really put on your thinking cap and say, not just what do I, as an art historian, want this to be, not just what do I want as a collector for this museum to be. You have to say, what makes this museum relevant to everyone around us? A good example, I think at the BMA was in my early tenure, I was approached by George to do a project, the Joyce Scott exhibition. And it was a transformative experience for us at the museum. And I can only describe one part of the show to give you some kind of an indication of really, it was pretty adventurous, wouldn't you say? He's recollecting it now. This was in the period coming out of the culture wars. And Joyce and George's students and George had a wonderful idea for an installation in the lobby of the museum, the old John Russell Pope building, venerable lobby. We moved The Thinker by Rodin into the lobby. Now that doesn't sound very daring because it's usually in the lobby anyway, but Joyce created the most amazing piece, a beaded piece of a lynched African-American man who was hung above the thinker. Now, this was, I think, a year after I arrived. It's one of those moments that I thought, I guess if I lose this job, I can get work someplace else. I'm sure you've had those moments, Freeman. But what was so spectacular is that we thought about it. We not only were creative, we thought, how could we engage people in a discussion about this topic? How could we open up a dialogue about things that are meaningful to this community? And amazingly, I kept waiting for something terrible to happen, some condemnation of this, but actually it created a conversation. So I'll let George talk a little about that.
Yeah, I would say the conversation really had to be about not just art historically in terms of why Rodin's thinker could have a right to be in juxtaposition with Joyce's lynched figure, but more importantly, what was the intention, the content of both of these works of art. And so what happened with the curators from the BMA and the students from MICA in the curatorial program is they sort of looked at what was the history of the thinker, of Rodin's thinker. And of course, the original thinker resided not in the scale that we know of today, but in a much smaller version, the top of his gates of hell. And so they went back to that in terms of the gates of hell and what was going on in that imagery, and in terms of what Rodin was trying to say with that piece, and really what was the thinker thinking about. And so that really was the hook, I think, in terms of the connection to everyone. So it didn't have to have the art history background to come in there. So the students working with the curators really put all this in context. Joyce's work in terms of lynching and the South and what happened during that time, and in terms of what was happening in Rodin's time with the gates of hell. And so they, through text panels, through family guides, through conversations and public programming, the museum and the students really worked together to try to make those connections. And that's just sort of one example that Dorian's citing of many different kinds of interventions throughout the museum during Joyce's exhibition.
We're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much, George Sisal and Dorian Bulger. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
We turn now to Fred Lazarus and Tim Noe. Fred Lazarus has been the president of Maryland Institute College of Art, MICA, for 34 years. MICA is a globally recognized leader in transformative art and design education. He was instrumental in launching the city's annual Artscape Festival, and his leadership in opening MICA's Graduate Studio Center on a neglected stretch of Baltimore's North Avenue triggered the revitalization of that entire area and its subsequent designation as Maryland's first official arts and entertainment district, Station North. Please welcome Fred Lazarus. Timothy Noe is here on the faculty of UMBC. He's an artist who engages traditional and electronic media in public life and public places. He received a 2006 Fulbright Senior Scholar Award from the Australia-America Fulbright Commission, lived in Prague and Sydney while on research leave. He has received 3 Maryland State Arts Council awards to support his work in the area of new genre and installation sculpture. He serves as a board member and composer for the Baltimore public performance art group Fluid Movement. Please welcome Tim Noe. So Fred, of the many projects you've been involved in, Station North is one of the big ones. Talk a little bit about the original goals for Station North, and what do you think the ingredients are that we need to have in Station North to make it continue to succeed?
Well, I think most people here are aware, Station North is the area that's around this train station that really stretches from Howard Street over to a little beyond Guilford over to the cemetery on the other side. And this area had the Everyman Theater, it had the Charles Theater, it had a number of arts activities in it for a long time. There was a large group of artists who had been working for many, many years in some of the industrial buildings on the east side of that district for many, many years. And when Governor O'Malley, then mayor, stepped forward to support the idea of bringing arts districts into Baltimore, the legislature supported that effort. This was one of the first applications for it. And I think what the belief here was that we talk a lot about space is really sort of the envelope which allows really exciting creativity to happen. And that's really what Freeman and his colleagues have created here, recognizing that these spaces really do make a difference, because when you enable people in these kinds of spaces, things that you never envisioned would happen will start happening. Well, Station North, in a sense, was that kind of space. We really felt that if we create this kind of public envelope, which is made up of lots of spaces, that there would be this kind of energy that would happen in that space, and it would continue to foster and grow as time went on. And I think that it's been a long struggle. It's just celebrating next week. Its 10th anniversary is an exciting time, and I'm really pleased that the governor's going to come and be a part of that event. But I think that lots of things have happened. We've created new artist housing. We've created dozens of new venues for the arts. We're creating different kinds of venues for the arts, so that we really are seeing now that the definition of what was an art space and what was a eating space or a drinking space or a different kind of space, those things are all being blended together now and creating these different kinds of spaces where all this is happening together. And I just think that we're just at the beginning of it, and hope it's still fragile. Hopefully we won't destroy it, and we'll keep it going in the right direction.
And Tim, you work in Station North. We've talked about space, this beautiful space we're in today. We've talked about the digital space. Your space for your work is an entire neighborhood. How does working in Station North, you were on the radio show a few weeks ago, we talked about the work you're doing with middle school kids there. How does that work in this neighborhood space environment inform what you're doing?
I think one of the real assets of Baltimore is that we think of it as Smaltimore. It's a series of neighborhoods, but also relations between people. And one of the things that we did with the children was just to get out of the school, which is on Guilford Avenue, the Baltimore Montessori Public Charter School, and to engage people on their stoops, in their studios, and in their galleries, and to have conversations about what it was like to work there, what it was like to create there. And the conversation was held between neighbors, artists, and people concerned for the well-being of the space. And so we would talk to people like Dale Hargrave, the president of the Greenmount West Community Association, and we toured his garden, which is this urban oasis in an area where literally homes fell down from neglect. They were demolished by neglect. And he started a grove of trees there and started growing greens and started running chickens and has fish ponds filled with goldfish. And it's this beautiful oasis in the middle of a city. And so we were really energized by what could happen when you started to horizontally integrate people rather than work up through a power structure to apply for government grants or something, to actually shake hands and work on things together. And so a lot of the artistic energy that's happening there is happening artist to artist, peer to peer. People are buying spaces and creating in those spaces that they've leveraged with their private capital.
Fred, the act of art making is sometimes inherently collaborative. You play in a symphony orchestra, you got lots of colleagues, you're part of a 15-member cast in a play. That's one thing. Visual artists, however, often work in a very solitary environment because the nature of their business is a solitary endeavor. How do you create community when you're working in a medium and in a profession that is inherently somewhat isolated from other folks?
Well, I think you create community by basically putting spaces together which allow people to interact and conversations to take place. And some of that can be done in sort of a forced way, in a sense where you create a fabulous facility like this. And others can happen in a very organic way. And I think that one of the things that we have in Baltimore are both those kinds of places where things like that can happen. And Station North actually has both those kinds of spaces, some of those which develop very organically. And I think one of the things that's really unusual about Baltimore is, for the most part, as a city, and Station North is a good example of this, this has not been a very top-down development. There's been no kind of organized plan as to exactly how this was going to happen. It's really a process much more of facilitating an organic process which allows the conversations to lead the development. And I think that it's a little bit like saying, where do you put the sidewalk? Well, you put it where people are walking. And if the path has been created, that's where they're going to go. And I think if we can really organize this area in a way to follow the lead of the artists, to follow the lead of the audiences, and try to create these spaces where this conversation can happen, it'll really foster exactly what we're talking about.
And Tim, you have one foot downtown, working in projects in Station North, and you teach out here at UMBC. Fred has been one of the folks who's been so successful and so terrific at integrating his university, his institute, to in the greater arts scene in Baltimore. How do you think this building, these new wonderful developments on the campus of UMBC out here in Catonsville, will help the UMBC community to be more present and interpolated into the scene in Baltimore, the art scene in general?
I think that it embodies a certain kind of exchange that's already happening. And if anything, it provides us with opportunities which may not be found downtown, because this kind of multi-million-dollar facility can't necessarily emerge very quickly in that kind of U space with a history and so forth. And that potential can be shared. And this is a very open community for collaboration, for dialogue and exchange. And I think Freeman Hrabowski and others have set by their example the desire to educate, but also to listen. And we're in a listening phase and really welcoming people to come to this space and engage us.
Tim Noe and Fred Lazarus, everybody. Thank you so much, gentlemen. Appreciate it. And we turn now to Vincent Lancisi, who's the founder of the Everyman Theater, and David Mitchell, who is the Assistant Artistic Director of Arena Players. Vincent Lancisi founded the Everyman Theater back in October of 1990. He's directed over 35 productions. In addition to his work at Everyman, he's taught acting and directing at Towson University, the University of Maryland, the Catholic University of America, Howard Community College, and at the Everyman. He's a member of the Society of Stage Directors and Choreographers and currently sits on the board of Station North Arts and Entertainment, and he's about to open his own new little theater pretty soon in January. Please welcome Vincent Lancisi. David Mitchell graduated from Morgan State University in 1998 and returned to Baltimore in 2005. Since then, he has been a facilitator and a major catalyst in bringing together diverse segments of the performing arts community. He initiated working relationships among students from Morgan, Coppin, Towson, UMBC, Goucher, and Loyola. He's also created opportunities for emerging arts organizations from diverse segments of the Baltimore performing arts community to work together on a variety of projects. Please welcome David Mitchell. So David, let me start with you. Both you and at Arena and Everyman have really have a clear mission that manifests itself in many respects in your physical space. So how does the physical space of Arena Theater serve your mission and your audience?
Well, I think the most important thing that I want people to leave with today is that Arena Players was created because African Americans had no place to go and produce theater. Back in 1953, we were talking civil rights movement, right? And so we had a collaborative group assemble themselves and said, well, we're going to do this one way or another. And they were wholly nomadic for about 10 years until they were able to find a place called the Arena Playhouse, 801 McCullough Street. And so we're moving into our 60th anniversary come next year, and we're still plugging away, still producing theater, and still producing theater with the idea in mind that we want to service the African American artist, African American community. So we were intentional with our mission, and we've stuck to that mission for 60 years, and we intend to do it for another 60 years.
Okay, good. God bless. And am I right that Arena Players is the longest continuous operating African-American theater in the United States?
African American community theater in the United States, yes.
Congratulations.
Yeah,
Terrific.
Thank you.
Great. And Vinny, you are going to open your theater on the west side. I want you to grab that microphone from David. What does this mean for you? We heard from Jessica and Wendy about what it means for them here at UMBC. What's it going to mean for Everyman?
Well, for Everyman, it means that we get to engage, inspire, and transform on a higher level because our artists will have a better tool set to be able to tell their stories. We're all about local artists in this region. We rely heavily on the training grounds of UMBC. 2 of our current cast of 4 are graduates from UMBC. So to see them get a toolkit like this, a place to tell stories and to create and to think and to engage audiences is extraordinary. And we hope to do exactly the same. In fact, I'm taking notes on all the equipment. Maybe, could we borrow some? That's what we hope.
Terrific. David, your work is distinguished for bringing people, often from diverse communities, together to work in concert on things. Talk about your approach to that. Talk about the challenges you face in doing that and the joys and opportunities as well.
Oh, wow. Well, you know, I'm a transplant. I'm not from Baltimore. I have been here working as a professional for going on 8 years now. And upon my arrival, I noticed that well, I guess everybody kind of knows that Baltimore's a little bit segregated, segmented. You know, people operate in their own pockets. It's not that they don't want to go into somebody else's pocket, it's just what they're used to. And so it became a part of my personal mission to try and create opportunities that were diverse and collaborative amongst different groups, specifically the academic arena, because, you know, I came to Baltimore going on 8 years now ago, just for that reason, to work at Morgan State University, and since then have now worked at Coppin State University, Goucher College, BCCC, and you know, the need on the part of the students that I run into is to connect with others like them at other institutions. So, you know, simultaneously, I'm working at Morgan. I go, well, I'm bored because, you know, I'm used to the New York lifestyle where you grind all day long. I'm coming from New York, you know, before I got here. And so I looked around and I found this small theater called Run of the Mill Theater that needed a managing director. And I said, well, I've never done that before, but here we go. So I, with Run of the Mill Theater, was able to create collaborative projects that involved multiple students from different universities, and have been doing that ever since. Yeah, so
Great.
that's part of it. Yeah.
Okay, and it's working out well. And Vinny, sometimes places, neighborhoods, transform spaces, and sometimes spaces, buildings, places, transform neighborhoods and areas. What do you expect will happen when Everyman finally gets ensconced in the west side of Baltimore?
What I hope will happen is a little bit of what happened when we came to what is now the Station North Arts Entertainment District. It was a very different place then. The Arts and Entertainment District didn't exist. There was very little going on in the current block that we reside in on Charles Street. And people all said, no one will come there. What are you doing? And theaters become places where people go to congregate, to experience the human emotion, and they become destinations. And so what we're hoping is that we can join the artists that are already doing great work downtown on the west side, and that with a new arts and entertainment district and the work of all these great artists, that we can create some momentum there that will complement the work that's being done in Station North. You know, we talk about sort of the great variety and diversity of different communities that are here in Baltimore, and I think that on the west side, you know, a lot of people worried that, well, would having more than one arts and entertainment district be a problem? Would it draw from each other? And I think that actually it's going to really enhance the other two that exist, because they're very, very different parts of the city, different architectures, different types of artists that work there. And I think that we're going to share resources, and we're going to work with the arts organizations that are already doing good work in creating a momentum on the west side that really hasn't happened in 30, 40 years since the major retailers left the area. So that's what we hope, is a rebirth and a rejuvenation for the west side.
And David, the Arena Players is kind of on the tip, the edge of this west side thing.
Yeah.
How do you think, you know, Everyman starting up down there and what we hope to be the continuing development of the west side development project, how will that have an impact on Arena?
Well, we're pretty ecstatic about Everyman being the anchor, you know, down there with the Hippodrome, and we just want to do our part on our end, and so we're really in a good place as far as our location is concerned, because we're right between the West Side Arts District and Station North, and we hope to create a bridge, if possible, between the two, you know, and increase people's awareness that we're there. I mean, a lot of people nowadays are really surprised that Arena Players is still doing its thing, but we're still doing our thing.
Indeed, and may you keep doing it for, as you say, another 60 years
That's
at
right.
least. David Mitchell and Vincent Lanchese, everybody. Thanks, guys. It's now my pleasure to turn to Sharanya Christmas Rose. She is the Executive Director of Muse 360. Am I saying your name right? Sharanya, I'm sorry. Sharanya Christmas Rose. She is a dancer, writer, and educator. Her training began at the Dance Theater of Harlem at the age of 3. She's currently the Executive Director of Muse 360. That's an arts nonprofit organization that works towards empowering the Baltimore City community to use arts as a tool to facilitate change. Please welcome Sharanya Christmas Rose. I'll get this right. And Bashi Rose is an actor, playwright, and director. He's performed and directed in the Theater Project, Creative Alliance, UMBC, Howard University, MICA, Arena Players, Center Stage, the Morgan State Theater, the Studio Theater, and many other venues. His plays Forties, Blunts, Chicken Heads, and Necessities has been read or produced at Artscape, the Hip Hop Theater Festival, and Classical Theater of Harlem's Future Classic Series. He is the co-founder of the NOMO Theater. Please welcome Bashi Rose. So, Sharanya, your group just recently performed outside in the rain. I understand. Groups can perform sort of anywhere, but there is sort of something special, almost sacred about, the theater, the proscenium stage, the curtain. How do you approach a performance that's in a non-traditional performing space? And are you aspiring to make that space, that street corner or that outside place or a non-traditional place, are you aspiring to make it have that same kind of sacred glow that a place like this has?
Well, we took our students, we have a program called Dancing Mini Drums Arts Education Project, and Bashi works with me on that. We take our students internationally and domestically to study the African diaspora of the arts. So this summer we went to New Orleans. And if you've ever been to New Orleans in July, it's rainy. So one of the things that, one of the projects that the students had to work on was reenacting the 1811 slave rebellion. And it started to pour down rain. We took them down to the bayou and it started to rain and I choreographed something outside. One thing that I try to do is go back to my roots. Growing up, going to Dance Theater Harlem in the 80s, it was in a brownstone. Of course, the space transformed as, Arthur Mitchell raised money and more people got involved. It's a world-renowned, ballet school in Harlem. So just growing up in that environment, I always approach using space to perform very organically. So what was really inspiring for us down in New Orleans was looking at our scholars and how they, these kids were between the ages of 10 to 18. And they didn't let the rain get in their way. They were running on, some concrete. They were running on, dancing on, pebbles. People were fishing behind them, So, I think that what that experience was for me was spiritual. And it really forced me to think about, and it forced our students to think about as artists, because they were artists when they were with us that summer, to think about ways to reach people beyond just the theater. A lot of people, in our community, sometimes they don't feel comfortable coming to the theater. They may live within Station North, but they don't, attend any activities in that area. So doing something like that, or, going down to the harbor sometimes, we might do a rehearsal down there. It really helps us reach and focus on our mission to expose people to the arts. So, like I said, people were fishing, in the back, and they saw some dance, they saw some theater, and they saw a lot of things, and that was good for us. It was very spiritual for us.
Yeah, great. And Bashi, I apologize for butchering the name of your play. It's Forties, Blunts, Chicken Heads, and Oven Necessities.
Yes.
Right? Did I get that right? Thank you. You work with men in the Maryland Correctional Training Center. You do work both in the prison and then you bring their work into theaters. Talk about that experience and the different inspiration, the different aspirations you have for when you're working within the facility and then outside of those walls.
Okay. Yeah. Usually when we think about space, a lot of times we think about, physical space having an effect on us. But going inside the prison, it's like the opposite. Space is already there. They're in the space. Some of them have been in that space for 20 or more years. So it's a situation where, they're coming from within to transform that space. And so going inside, I'm born and raised in Baltimore, so I was intrigued to be able to go to Hagerstown because I had boys who did time in Hagerstown. They came home talking about, getting beat down by quote-unquote hillbillies. So being able to go into Hagerstown, not as a prisoner, as a black man, being able to work with my brothers in this space, for me, was very profound. And also, they were able to utilize theater to transform that space into a place of freedom and safety amongst themselves and creativity. So for me, and for the men, working in the prison, it's an opportunity for them to build with one another, where usually they're in a space with men they usually wouldn't even build with, they may not even usually trust. So this space is transformed into a peaceful, challenging, and engaging environment.
And Sharanya, I understand that you've taken kids, both you and Bashi both have taken kids to various other spaces. You've traveled with them. Who have you taken, where have you gone, and what have you learned?
So DMD is a program Bashi and I founded in 2007. And the first 2 years, we actually went to New York City, to Harlem, and we visited the Schomburg Theater, and we also visited various places in Harlem. The third year, I got a bright idea to take them to Jamaica, St. Anne, Jamaica. I didn't know how we were going to do it, but we raised the money grassroots style, and we took about 14 adults. Well, it was 10 children and 4 adults. Well, 16 of us total to St. Anne, Jamaica. The year after, we went to Costa Rica. I had just had my little son. He was 5 months old, and we were staying in the tip of the Caribbean side of Costa Rica, which is the jungle. So I didn't know, you look online and you see different things, and we stayed in the jungle. But it was wonderful. It was an experience for me, but it was wonderful. And that was Limon, Costa Rica. Last year we stayed in Humacao, Puerto Rico, and we visited Louisa. And that experience was really great as well. So each place that we go to, we are basically amongst the people. Last year we visited Louisa, which is where they've preserved most of the African culture there. And they have a festival every year, actually on Bashi's birthday, July 25th. Samuel Lynn, who is a world-renowned artist, we were able to go to his studio. And he has statues as big as this stage in his home. So the students were able to engage in that and learn about the culture. And what our students ultimately do is they take those experiences, they bring them back to Baltimore, and they create a multidisciplinary performance with that. When we returned from New Orleans, one of the things that we did down in New Orleans was go to the lower Ninth Ward. And going to the lower Ninth Ward, the students themselves, they took that environment and made it more positive by going up to the residents and asking them their experience with Hurricane Katrina. And you see things on TV, you see, things that have happened. It's been, 7 years now? And that was very moving for them as artists, very empowering for them. And I think that, from their testimonies, we had a filmmaker in our group. He is a senior now at the Carver School in Towson. And, he created a video under Bashi's direction about that experience for the students. And when you watch that video, you get the gist of exactly, you get to look through the eyes of these young people. And, I really feel like the arts enable us to see the human experience better. That's how I've been able to, be a young artist growing up, in New York with my parents, just dancing in the living room and, coming down to Baltimore. I went to school for business, believe it or not, but quit my job to do this. So when the students see someone like me and, I'm investing in these students by, trying to do what I can to get them outside of Baltimore, but ultimately to empower them to bring the arts back to Baltimore. So when they have these experiences, again, it humbles them, it keeps them, it keeps them current. It helps them to expand more on their the art that they create, because each student, we had 15 scholars this summer, and each scholar had to create their own piece of artwork, whether it was a film, a dance, a monologue, and they had to use music with that sometimes. So, those experiences with DMD that we create in the summer, and it's only for 6 weeks, but they're able to really use that and empower the community.
That's a program we got to keep an eye on. Bashi, we've talked about how the space affects the work of theater artists. Sharanya talking about the kids outside and the folks fishing and it's raining and stuff. If you're inside, I want to follow up on something you said a minute ago. If you're inside a so-called correctional facility, how does the work affect that space? How does the work affect those actors, those artists, and their relationship to that space, which, as you mentioned, they spend a lot of time in?
It affects them on a lot of different levels. One example, one of the first pieces the men did at MCTC, they were supposed to do Fences by August Wilson, but because of scheduling and a lot of issues they had to deal with in the prison, they were only able to do excerpts of August Wilson, and then they combined original poetry and improvisational scenes. Well, the lead actor, the guy that played Troy, was an older prisoner, and very strong presence. And then the youngest guy that played his son was the youngest guy in the group, but also had a very strong presence throughout the prison. So they tended to clash a lot. But what happened was, as a result of doing the play, going over the lines, doing the dramaturgy, their relationship transformed drastically. You know, those walls were broken down, and you saw these two men evolve into two different human beings. Also, they were able to perform the piece for the larger population. And just seeing the other inmates respond to the August Wilson pieces and to the original pieces was profound. They had a Q&A afterwards. And, you know, some of the first questions were, you know, when can we join drama? You know, the other responses were, you know, the guys ended up talking about their own relationships with their fathers or with their mothers, you know, relating to the play.
Incredible stuff. Bashi Rose, Sharanya Christmas Rose, thank you so much. Thanks, you guys. And now we move on to our last contestants. Are you our last contestants? Maybe you're not our last contestants. No. Oh, we have other contestants after this. Sorry. They're not our last contestants. Sorry. We have two more sets of contestants. Kalima Young is the coordinator of the Baltimore Art and Justice Project, which seeks to identify, amplify, and support the work of arts-based practitioners who are advancing the cause of social justice in the city of Baltimore. She's also directed Connect to Protect Baltimore. It's a participatory research project that mapped community assets to support coalition building and advocacy around HIV/AIDS. Ms. Young owns and operates Kubla Khan Productions, which is an independent video production company. Please welcome Kalima Young. And Nicole King is here on the faculty of UMBC. She's an assistant professor in the Department of American Studies and the director of the Orser Center for the Study of Place, Community, and Culture. Her current project is called Mapping Baybrook. It's a collaborative and interdisciplinary exploration of place that blends digital mapping technologies with research into the history and culture of Baltimore's Baybrook community. Please welcome Nicole King. So, Kalima, let me start with you. Most folks think of maps, perhaps in the way that most folks automatically think of spaces as physical things, and maps are sort of these flat navigational tools, but your maps are considerably different. Describe how you're mapping and using the data that you're collecting.
Well, the Baltimore Art Plus Justice Project is working to map the artists, designers, advocates, organizations, and nonprofit groups who are working at that intersection of art and social justice. So these stakeholder groups are able to fill out profiles about the work that they're doing, their social justice-based work. And then we're going to be able to take that information and we're going to put it on an interactive map. And this map is going to be layered with different data, demographic data about Baltimore City. So artists and advocates can work smarter and stronger and collaborate with one another. So say, for instance, you're an artist, a theater artist, and you want to do pregnancy prevention theater work in Park Heights. You can put in that zip code and see that actually maybe the issues in Park Heights aren't necessarily pregnancy prevention, pregnancy issues with young people. Maybe it's gang violence. And then you need to tweak your art accordingly to the issues that you're trying to affect. Or if it's an advocacy organization who's like focusing on an issue like homelessness, they can put in the words homelessness and hopefully find artists who are interested in working on homelessness with them. So we're trying to sort of identify and strengthen and support that collaboration between the artists and the advocates so that they can make stronger, more relevant work that actually impacts structural issues in the city.
And Nicole, you've talked about the difference between space and place. So how does that explain that? Explain what the difference is, and put it in the context of this beautiful building.
All right, I love that question because I love to talk about the distinction between place and space. Place, and of course I must say, to begin with, scholars would disagree and debate and have very different interpretations. But the way that I think about place, and pulling from human and cultural geographers, is really that a place is a specific location that we fill with meaning. And a space is the larger context, the social context in which places kind of exist. And so they have a relationship between one another where, say, spaces are about mobility and freedom, and places are about kind of pause and comfort. But they're constantly in negotiation with one another, and I think, this beautiful place that we're in now, which was a building before people began to inhabit it, and it was just a built environment, is something that we could think about located in a larger space of UMBC, certainly, but what we're doing today, trying to think about this as a place located in the larger space of, the greater Baltimore culture and arts scene. So making those connections, having the specific and the general, and how they work with one another. And as, Yifu Tuan said, the great human geographer, that these can't exist without one another, and they're constantly in conversation.
Interesting. And Kalima, I'm interested that you've chosen mapping as a mechanism to advance this intersection and this understanding of art and social justice. What does this particular technique afford you in terms of opportunities to do the work? How does mapping help you in particular?
Well, I was brought onto the project. The brilliant folks at the Office of Community Engagement at MICA and the Open Society Foundation in New York said, hey, let's do some maps. And then I was brought in. And
was it a tough sell for you?
No, it was not. It was not. I used to be afraid of maps, actually. As a canvasser, I was an activist, and we had to have actual physical maps to walk around neighborhoods and knock on people's door and beg for money for the environment. And I used to get lost in a cul-de-sac. Yeah. I just could not. I'm
with you.
Just like, what? I don't know. I don't understand. I'm running away. So I used to be afraid of maps until I was in public health for over 11 years. And I started to see the power of mapping to actually tell stories, to not just identify where there are problems, because we were making, at Connect to Protect, we were making thematic maps about HIV and what was impacting young people, but not just like where the gaps are, but actually where the resources are. So when I think about maps in terms of taking that idea and putting it in the artistic community, I really think about this is an opportunity to highlight assets that are here in Baltimore City, and to make maps that live and breathe. Because artists and nonprofits and advocacy organizations, they'll be able to self-administer their own profiles that'll be going on this map, and we'll actually be able to see where things live, where the vibrancy is in Baltimore, and highlight even those moments of vibrancy that don't necessarily get the funding, that have been around for a long time, but you've never seen them. So it turns maps from being those scary things that I used to be afraid of and get lost with, into things that are like an actual tool, so we can know just how awesome the space is and the wealth of vibrancy that we have in our community.
I'm with you. I have a GPS to get me from my bed to the bathroom. So Nicole, you're in this project, Mapping Baybrook. This distinction between space and place is fascinating. How do you, on a map then, how are you distinguishing and representing both space and place?
Well, and I must say that I have never been scared of maps. I have clung to them because I am perpetually lost. I have a bad sense of direction. So I'm constantly needing to see myself and to locate myself and connect myself to a certain space. For example, I went to an Orioles game, and I was looking at the map trying to find my seat, and they didn't have one of those, "You are here." So I felt like, no, there's just numbers here. Where am I?
I am here, darn it.
And so it's very confusing. So I need a map that has both kind of context and specificity. So what we're doing in Mapping Baybrook, which if you're not familiar, these are in the tip of Baltimore City, the southernmost neighborhoods. Brooklyn, Curtis Bay, Hawkins Point are the three neighborhoods that are still in existence in this area. And this area has been a historic dumping ground and industrial zone for the city. So it's trying to connect the specific places places where this kind of industrial work to the larger sense of Baltimore City and to all of us, because while we may not go to these areas, our trash goes to these areas, our waste, our cars are crushed and stacked in somewhat beautiful ways in this neighborhood. The new incinerator may be built in this neighborhood. So kind of connecting both place and space and being able to, why working with the IRC at UMBC, like Kalima and I both do in our projects, really working with designers to be able to locate stuff in place, but see the larger connection to cities, to other places, and mostly to see the layers in those connections, because while this neighborhood is known for its industrialization, its contamination, it is also a neighborhood and a community full of great stories and people who persevered, built community gardens, built baseball fields, in spite of this larger kind of social context, the space that they were inhabiting. So really to see our relationships and to understand better other people's relationships and to make those connections through like a virtual kind of ecosystem online.
Fascinating stuff. Kalima Young, Nicole King, thank you so much. Appreciate it. All right, Marvin Pinkert started his new job as the executive director of the Jewish Museum of Maryland at the beginning of the summer. He has spent 24 years in museum management developing spaces, and his most recent assignment was as the creator and director of the National Archives Experience in Washington. Marvin, welcome to Baltimore as the new director of the Jewish Museum. Kevin Griffin Marino is a UMBC graduate of 1995. He is the founder and host of Potluck Storytelling, which is formerly the Full Circle Storytelling. He's appeared as part of the Stoop Storytelling series, Glass Mine Theater, the Baltimore Playwrights Festival, and Ignite Baltimore. By day, he is a senior program officer at the Baltimore Community Foundation, where he works on issues of public policy, diversity, inclusion practices, and the arts. Please welcome Kevin Griffin Marino. So Kevin, let me start with you. I interviewed E.L. Doctorow one time, and he had written a book called Creationists, and he had as a statement in this book that stories propose life as something of moral consequence. And they're very important to us for that very reason. Stories propose that life is something of moral consequence. So narratives and stories, very important to the human experience. With your work as a storyteller, how does a space like this and spaces, the kind of spaces we've been talking about all afternoon, inform the opportunity to demonstrate moral consequence to what we're doing?
Well, I'm no E.L. Doctorow. Just get that out. But there is a quote that I was thinking of that sort of speaks to your question. It's one of my favorites by Rilke, which is, there is no place that is not looking at you. You must change your life. For me, the places we inhabit shape the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves. And in turn, we shape those communal stories that are housed in those places. I fell in love in Dr. Jeffrey's U.S. since 1945 class. And it was in the Academic 4 building, which, with the greatest respect, is nobody's idea of an architectural marvel. And as much as I would like to say that I fell in love with learning, which I did in the class, there was a classmate who sat in front of me, and at the time that we had the class, while we were learning about Philip Caputo's Rumor of War and its commentary on our experience in Vietnam, the light would shine through the window and strike my classmate, strike her hair, and I thought that was very beautiful. And I got my heart broken at the Fine Arts Building sometime later. So for me, the spaces that I moved through at UMBC, the spaces that I moved through at UMBC were integral to the way that I developed and the story that I tell myself. And when I enter a space, particularly one that I've been to over the years, it's hard not to see it as wonderfully haunted, as visited by stories that circle around in tracks, and we can interact with those stories and gain some measure of meaning and purpose through them.
Yeah, interesting. Marvin, we've talked about how spaces create stories and stories create spaces, and how they impact each other. What are some of the examples of how we might see this sort of story space narrative unfold in a new beautiful building like this? You've had so much experience creating those experiential situations in museums.
Coming here today, I was kind of thinking about new spaces with old stories and old spaces with new stories. You know, an old space wants to tell a story. The Jewish Museum of Maryland, you've got the 1845 synagogue that has within it the story of the division of the Jewish community during the Civil War. It has the Reform movement. It has the conversion to being the first Lithuanian Catholic Church, and then it goes back to being an Orthodox synagogue. It has all these stories that it naturally wants to tell. But as David Mitchell pointed out a moment ago, in a highly segmented community, we've got to think of new stories for old spaces. We've got to figure out ways that we start to create something that is more universal out of that old space. I started a conversation with Skip Sanders at the Lewis Museum when I got to town. And we were sitting there talking about our projects for the spring. And we had an exhibit coming called Zap Pow Bam, which is about the Jewish illustrators in the 30s and 40s who created Superman, Batman, Captain America, Wonder Woman. And Skip says to me, well, as a matter of fact, the exhibit we have is about an illustrator named Brian Collier, who did children's books on Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King, Abraham Lincoln. And we're sitting there and I say, that's really about heroes, real and imagined, and really the sense of empowerment that came in both communities, one during a period in the rise of Nazism, the other in a period where there was concern about disenfranchisement, etc. The power to create or to envision heroes who had the solution to the problem, that's a new story that we can tell in our old space. And I can't wait to get back into this space to see 1,000-year-old folk traditions on this stage, because it will be different in this space.
Yeah, that's terrific. Now, Kevin, you told us about your experience here, your individual story here at UMBC. Of course, great institutions like this are just rife with a plethora of individual stories. How do you, what goes into creating that larger narrative that has room for everybody's story?
Different speakers have spoken about this idea from different perspectives. For me, the lesson is that when we shape our spaces, we have to be intentional, and we have to understand what impact our space might have on the people that are going to be inhabiting it and interacting with it. I live on Greenmount Avenue in Baltimore City, right on the border between a fairly economically distressed neighborhood and a really rather wealthy neighborhood. And all that separates them is a 6-inch concrete berm. And when I walk my dog every day, I come out on Greenmount Avenue and I make 2 lefts, and all of a sudden I'm in tree-lined boulevards and reflecting on the strangeness of my dog going to the bathroom in a more affluent neighborhood than I do. But more seriously, every time I take that turn, my story intersects and becomes a thread woven through the outrageous and abominable history of exclusionary zoning and segregationist policies toward urban design, and the whole sad legacy of structural racism and classism and disparity in Baltimore. And I think that when we think about those stories, that it is the work of the practitioner, the artist and the practitioner of the humanities and the storyteller to pay attention, to bear witness to those stories and communicate them so that going forward we can be more intentional, more humane, more compassionate, more egalitarian in the way that we shape our spaces.
Yeah, beautifully said. Marvin, you talk about new stories in old spaces, old stories in new spaces. when it comes to old and traditional and classic, there's a role for nostalgia in all of that. How does a place like this, brand spanking new, day one, as we sit here, over time become, as you've written, a space remembered? What's going to lead to that moment?
Well, my first thought is that it's no longer brand spanking new. You've already had the governor, a musical group, 14 speakers on the stage. This has a history. But it is true that spaces age over time, and sometimes we know a space is old because we see the scuff marks and we see the paint that peels and we say that's an old space. But what makes a space old and important is what went on inside it, the experiences that people have with it, what brings their heart to the space. And I can tell from what I've already seen today that for this community, there's going to be a lot of heart in this space. And that's why 100 years from now, when they celebrate the centennial of this building, it's not too early to start planning. When they celebrate the centennial of this building, which then will have been called the old new space because there will be a newer space next door, I think that it is those things that this college, this community, will have brought into this room that will really be the pieces remembered.
Great place to end it there. Marvin Pinkert and Kevin Griffin Moreno, thank you so much. So I have been derelict in my duty to keep us on schedule here. I'm a little bit over, and I apologize. Woohoo, is that a good thing or a bad thing? All right. But I do want to give Freeman Hrabowski the last word. I'm asked to remind you that there are tours of the building, and the Outdoor Arts and Humanities Festival will continue until 6:30. And again, tonight, the inaugural lecture, The Humanities Without Apologies, begins at 7 o'clock. Please, in show business, the first rule is never work with kids and dogs. They either upstage you or soil the furniture. I think we should add a third rule, given the opening ceremonies this afternoon: never follow Freeman Hrabowski. He is a force of nature, and not only a fantastic soul of this institution, but a fantastic member of our community. We are so proud and so blessed to have you here. Please welcome once again Freeman Hrabowski.
My voice teacher, Professor Salkin, would tell me to use the mic, not holler, and to have the same passion and yet to allow the mic to work. I got that. Give all of the speakers and Tom a wonderful round of applause. Really nice. Very nice. Wonderful. Just wonderful. I know we all feel a sense of elevation and the possibilities, Lynn. Just everyone around, faculty and students and others. I am so excited because of several things. Number one, we've got incredible faculty and students here, and staff working on things. Number two, we have such wonderful partners, Fred. All of you are such wonderful partners, and we value those relationships. We are of this community. There's no doubt about that. I was thinking about Fred and Tim. Some of you don't know, Tim is a graduate of MICA, and it's wonderful to have that kind of interplay there. I would tell you this. I was in New York this morning at McGraw-Hill, and I heard a wonderful person quote Aristotle, and I was thinking about this the entire time people were speaking. He quoted Aristotle as saying, excellence is never an accident, that it's about choice, not about chance, but about choice. Well, it is so moving to think we choose the arts and humanities. A round of applause for UMBC.